Part 3. Verbal Instructions and Cues. We've spent 2 parts on showing. Now we turn to telling. And it deserves just as much care, because words are where well-meaning instructors do the most accidental damage. The thread through this entire section is a single counterintuitive idea. With verbal instruction, less is almost always more. And where you aim a learner's attention matters more than how much you say. Part 3 builds in a deliberate order. We start with the hard limit that makes everything else necessary, the learner's tiny attention budget, which can hold only a couple of instructions before it overflows. Then we cover where to point the attention you do spend, outward, at the effect of the movement, through the powerful action effect research. From there, we look at teaching a skill without explaining it at all, using analogies and implicit learning that hold up under pressure. A trap to avoid in your own language, the ironic effects of don't instructions, and which to stress first when a skill needs both speed and accuracy. Finally, we arrive at the most practical tool in the whole chapter, the verbal cue, the 1 to 3 word phrase that either directs attention or prompts a movement without flooding the budget. So part 3 runs from a constraint to a principle to a toolkit. Master it and you'll say far less and teach far more. Let's start with that attention budget.
And the very first thing to understand about words is that your learner has a strict, small budget for them. Back in our attention chapter, we said people have a limited capacity to attend to information. Apply that to instructions, and the implication is sobering. A beginner can really only handle about 1 or 2 instructions at a time. Why so few? Because they're already splitting their limited attention between 2 jobs, remembering what you just told them and actually executing the skill. Even a modest pile of verbal information can blow right past their capacity. The sketch shows it perfectly, the 3rd instruction coin spilling straight out of the jar. And here's the line I want you to carry into your career. Providing too much information in verbal instructions can be just like providing no information at all, because an overwhelmed learner can't use any of it and may abandon all of it. So the discipline is ruthless selection. Of all the true and useful things you could say, what are the 1 or 2 that matter most right now, at this stage, for this learner? Say those. Bank the rest for later when there's room. With words, less truly is more. And resisting the urge to say everything you know is one of the hardest, most valuable habits a teacher can build.
Now, given that you only get a word or 2, where should you point them? This is one of the most useful, best supported findings in the entire field. It comes from the action effect hypothesis, which says actions are planned and controlled best by their intended effects. Translated into teaching, direct the learner's attention to the outcome of the movement, not to their own body. We call these external focus versus internal focus. An internal cue, bend your elbow, rotate your hips, aims attention inward at the body's mechanics, and it reliably tends to slow learning and to crack under pressure. An external cue, hit the target, send the ball to that corner, aims at the movement's effect, and it speeds learning and improves retention. Gabriele Wolf and colleagues have shown this benefit across an enormous range. Golf swings, basketball shots, volleyball serves, soccer passes, dart throws, and crucially for those of you headed into clinical work, for balance, including in people with Parkinson's disease and stroke. There's even a striking ski simulator study where adding an instruction about a body movement actually made performance worse, and still worse under stress. The lesson is clean. Aim attention outward. When you catch yourself about to say, move your body part this way, stop and rephrase it as the effect you want in the world. It's a small change in wording with an outsized effect on learning.
Closely related is a wonderful idea. You can sometimes teach a skill best by not explaining it at all, through analogies. Richard Masters and colleagues showed that a good movement analogy lets people learn implicitly, with very little explicit, verbalizable knowledge of what they're doing. Their classic example, teaching a table tennis topspin shot. Instead of a checklist of instructions about arm angle and paddle motion, learners were simply told to swing up the hypotenuse of an imaginary right triangle. 1 image replaced 10 rules. And those learners performed better under pressure and while distracted than people taught the explicit rules. Why? Here's the mechanism, and it's important. When explicitly taught learners are stressed, they tend to reinvest. They consciously revert to thinking through the verbal rules they were given. And that conscious, rule-bound control interferes with smooth, automatic movement and destabilizes performance. If you never loaded them up with explicit rules in the first place, there's nothing to reinvest in, so the skill holds up. Analogies build skills that survive pressure. That's a gift for anyone teaching a performer who'll eventually have to do it in a game, on a stage, or in a high-stakes moment. And it's a reminder that the most economical instruction, a single vivid image, can also be the most robust.
Now, a trap you must learn to avoid in your own coaching language: ironic effects. Have you ever stood over a free throw, a putt, or a penalty kick, told yourself, "Don't miss," and then missed? That's an ironic effect, the tendency to do exactly the thing you're trying to avoid. Binch and colleagues showed it cleanly in soccer penalty shooting. They told players to shoot accurately, but to be careful not to shoot within reach of the goalkeeper. And what happened? Those players fixated on the keeper longer. Their quiet eye on the open goal got shorter, and they actually kicked the ball closer to him. The instruction, "Don't hit the keeper," pulled their attention straight to the keeper, which pulled the ball there too. The sketch shows the gaze line landing right on him. The take-home message for your instructions is simple and absolute. Tell performers what to do, not what to avoid. Hit the open corner, never "don't hit the keeper." Land softly, never "don't land hard." A negative instruction biases attention toward the very thing that needs to be avoided, so it quietly recruits the error you were warning against. Phrase every cue as a target, not a hazard.
One more instruction effect, this time about strategy. When a skill demands both speed and accuracy, and many do, the instructions you give early actually bias which strategy the learner builds, so you have to choose the emphasis deliberately. Blaise, in 1991, had people learn a fast aiming task under 3 instructions: be accurate, be fast, or be both. The group told to emphasize accuracy built a stable, well-formed movement pattern. And here's the kicker: that accuracy-first group eventually became the fastest overall once you accounted for the time lost correcting errors. The groups pushed towards speed locked in fast but sloppy movements that cost them later. The principle, which fits both motor program and dynamical systems theory, the movement pattern is the invariant core, and speed is just a parameter you can dial up later. So groove the form first, then add the tempo. Accuracy before speed. This runs against a strong intuition, especially in sports that prize quickness, where everyone wants to go fast immediately. So it's worth saying out loud to your learners, we're going to build it right before we build it fast, because that's actually the faster road in the end. That brings us to the most practical tool in the chapter: verbal cues. The problem with full instructions is they tend to give either too little or too much. Verbal cues, a concept from Landon, solve this. A verbal cue is a short, concise phrase, just 1 to 3 words, and it does exactly one of 2 jobs. Job 1, direct the performer's attention to a regulatory condition in the environment that matters, like look at the ball, which points the eyes where they need to be. Job 2, prompt a key movement component of the skill, like bend your knee, which triggers one essential piece of the action. That's it, attention or movement. The beauty of a cue is that it respects the attention budget we opened this part with. Instead of holding a paragraph of instructions, the learner holds 2 words, which leaves the rest of their limited attention free for the perceptual and movement demands of the actual skill. A good cue is almost a compression algorithm. It packs one critical idea into a couple of syllables the learner can hold and fire at the right instant. Learning to write them is one of the most transferable teaching skills you'll build.
And cues genuinely work. Let me give you 3 quick pieces of evidence across very different learners. Masser taught first graders to do headstands with the cue "shoulders over your knuckles." The cued kids still performed the headstand well 3 months later. The uncued class didn't. Cutton and Landon taught beginning tennis players to say a string of cues out loud as they hit: ready, ball, turn, hit, head down. And those self-cueing students outlearned classmates who didn't, even ones who got verbal feedback. The same self-talk approach, split, turn, hit, improved skilled varsity players' volleys, so this isn't just for novices. And there are clear guidelines for writing good cues. Keep them to 1 to 3 words, cue only the most critical elements, time them so they prompt the action rather than interrupt it, use them to mark the rhythm of the movement, and, nicely, have the learner speak them first so the cue becomes their own internal voice rather than yours. Short, sharp, well-timed, and theirs. Done right, a handful of words can carry a whole skill. Let's recap part 3. Respect the attention budget. 1 or 2 instructions, never a flood, because too much is as useless as nothing. Aim attention outward, the action effect. External focus on the movement's effect beats internal focus on the body for both learning and performance under pressure. Analogies build implicit skills that survive stress because there are no explicit rules to reinvest in. Don't instructions backfire through ironic effects, so phrase every cue as a target, not a hazard. And you should stress accuracy before speed, grooving the pattern before adding the tempo. And verbal cues, those 1 to 3 word phrases, either direct attention or prompt a movement. Respect the attention budget and work beautifully as the learner's own self-talk. Words, used with discipline, are as powerful as any picture and far easier to overuse. That's the whole art of part 3. Choose few words and aim them well. To bring it all together, I had 3 summary sheets made, each aimed at a different profession you might enter, so you can see today's science wearing the clothes of a real job. This first one is for occupational and physical therapists, evidence-based strategies for demonstration and verbal cues in rehabilitation. Trace what it's actually saying. On the left, strategic demonstration carries our whole first half into the clinic. Use the mirror neuron advantage through action observation therapy, exploit peer observation, and demonstrate the coordination pattern when a patient is relearning a genuinely new movement. On the right, effective verbal cues carry the second half. Lead with external focus. Reach for the cup, not flex your elbow, and keep prompts to concise 1 to 3 word phrases that won't overload a fatigued or impaired learner. Notice that every recommendation on the sheet traces straight back to a principle we earned today. There's nothing decorative here. For those of you headed into rehab, this is the chapter rewritten as a working clinical playbook, and it's a reminder that show and tell, done with this much care, is itself a therapeutic intervention. This second sheet is the coaching version, the science of coaching, balancing visual demonstration with precise verbal cues on the field and the court. I especially want you to study the little decision guide in the middle because it's the whole chapter compressed into a single choice. It maps a skill goal to the right instruction mode. A new coordination calls for visual demonstration. Rhythm and timing call for auditory modeling, and goal accuracy calls for external focus verbal cues. That's our match the method to the goal principle as a coach's cheat sheet, the antidote to demonstrating everything by reflex. Notice it even flags avoiding don't instructions to dodge ironic effects and front-loading demonstrations before practice rather than sprinkling them in. The deeper point I want you to take from this card is that good coaching isn't a bag of inherited tricks. It's applied motor learning. When you understand why each recommendation works, you can invent your own drills and cues that honor it and adapt on the fly when an athlete doesn't respond the way the sheet predicts. And the third is for physical education, dance, and coaching, built around the action-effect hypothesis sitting right at the center. Direct attention toward outcomes, not body mechanics, to bypass cognitive overload. Around that hub, you'll recognize the entire chapter laid out as a system. Focus on the coordination pattern. Exploit the beginner watching beginner advantage. Front-load modeling before practice. Minimize the information load on a learner's attention. Lean on short verbal cues. And use that internal versus external versus analogy comparison we walked through with the hypotenuse example. One image, our whole chapter, pointed straight at the gym and the studio. What I love about this sheet is that it puts attention, where it's aimed and how much it's asked to hold, at the literal center, which is exactly right. Nearly every good decision in this chapter, whether you're showing or telling, comes down to managing the learner's attention wisely. So let me land us with the 3 things I most want you to carry out of this room. The durable core, long after the specific studies blur. First, demonstrations teach coordination. Learners read the invariant relative motions, mostly below awareness, so demonstrate most when a genuinely new pattern is needed. Give several demos and front-load them before practice, rather than sprinkling them in. Second, match the method to the goal. Sound for rhythm, beginners watching beginners for problem solving, external focus for accuracy, and never assume a single ideal form fits every body, or that the polished expert is the only worthwhile model. And third, say less and aim outward. Honor the attention budget with 1 or 2 instructions pointed at the outcome. Lean on analogies that survive pressure. Phrase cues as targets rather than don'ts, and back it all with short verbal cues to prompt the rest. Show well, say less, and you'll teach far more than you ever could by showing everything and saying it all. That restraint is the mark of an expert teacher. Thanks, everyone. Go show a little, say a little, and watch how much more your learners do. See you next time.